Be sure to friend us on Facebook. You can do it right now. Visit facebook.com/Voice America or search for us at keyword Voice America.
The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericahealth.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Good afternoon and welcome to 1 Hour at a Time. Recovery begins with education, and host Mary Woods is here to educate individuals and families and provide support through the recovery process. Now here's your host, Mary Woods.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 1 Hour at a Time. This is Mary Woods, and I'm your host today. I'm also struggling with a bit of a cold, so I want to apologize ahead of time if I start to cough. Our show today, I think, is going to be hopefully really illuminating for a lot of you. We're going to be talking about accreditation, quality of improvement accreditation, and we get our accreditation at WestBridge through CARF. And I think it's so important for both families and individuals and other providers to understand why it's important to be, in our instance, CARF affiliated. There are so many people and there are programs out there that don't define well what they do, and I think it really confuses the consumer. And one of the great things about being accredited for us by CARF is we really had to figure out who we are and how we're going to go about doing business. And I think that is just so important so that we are able to provide good quality work. And so I'd like to introduce our guest, who is Michael Johnson, and he joined CARF as Managing Director of Behavioral Health Care in 2013. His responsibilities include maintaining standards for behavioral health, training and marketing to behavioral health industry. Michael is a certified addictions professional, and he has more than 30 years of experience as a clinician and a manager and executive working in mental health, substance abuse, and intellectual disabilities. Michael has been a leader in the industry, providing expertise to national and state initiatives in training, accreditation, and EMR adoption. He was a CARF surveyor for 16 years and holds a master's degree in communications from the University of Central Florida. Thank you, Michael, for agreeing to spend this hour with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mary.
I think it's really important if we could just lay the groundwork about how accreditation came about, and maybe we can go from there. What's the historical perspective on accreditation?
Well,
for behavioral health.
Yeah, I mean, that narrows it down a little bit, actually, because, there has been accreditation in a variety of different settings in education. Certainly, I think most people are familiar with accreditation for universities and secondary schools. There's been accreditation of hospitals for a number of years, but really, accreditation in behavioral health is a relatively newer area of accreditation. It with CARF, it started in the late 80s when we actually began to develop programs of accreditation in mental health and substance abuse arena. I think that part of the rationale for that is there is not a very well and universally defined set of standards for quality in the delivery of mental health services, or in the addictions world. And so what accreditation does is at least it says to the consumer ultimately of services that this particular organization has, reached out, brought in some international or national accrediting body to say that, we conform to these set guidelines of our practice, that we are working to improve quality and report outcomes, and that we are seeking to be the best that we can be. The process of accreditation is a constant evolution of quality improvement activities. And I think that's the core of why an organization becomes accredited and why that's important ultimately to family members and to individuals seeking help would be that you can be assured that not only that somebody else is coming in and spending some time overseeing the activities of this particular organization, but also that the organization has committed itself to understanding, as you said, how it defines itself, how it defines its quality improvement activities and its outcomes, and organizing all of that information in a way that's meaningful to be able to test itself against the best organizations in the industry.
You know, I think it's important for families to understand, and everybody, the process of continuing improvement. And you kind of touched on it a minute ago, but you know, in the old days when I worked in an addiction treatment program, we had a 28-day program, and that 28-day program pretty much looked the same day one as it did, 4 years into it. And the thought of evolving care was not really what we were thinking about doing. We were thinking about adhering to a model of care without thinking that it would evolve or that people would evolve. And then we started to get people that had cocaine addiction or eating disorders, and we really had to take a step back and look at who we are and what do we do. And it was a confusing time.
Well, one of the other things that's inherent in your statement, and I too worked in one of those 28-day substance abuse residential treatment programs, and really what we believed was that the model is what worked, right? We had a curriculum. We believed that, once you got exposed to all of this information, then you were going to eventually conform to a set of recovery principles that we had laid out. We believed that we knew what individuals needed more so than perhaps the individuals themselves knowing what they needed. And I think part of the evolution of our field has been that we recognize that not everyone recovers the same. Not everybody, adapts to the particular service that we deliver the same way, and that we need to not only do a thorough assessment, and certainly our CARF standards apply here. Not only do we have to do a thorough assessment of each individual, but we really have to develop or customize treatment programs that meet the needs of those individuals based on that assessment. And certainly we gathered, history from people, back in those days that we were referencing, but we really didn't use that to determine what the individual needed. And I think that's one of the great things that organizations hopefully have begun to evolve more and more into in today's world.
So maybe you could just give us an example of how being CARF-accredited would affect somebody's, like an organization's fiscal health.
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways, both direct and indirect. I think from a direct perspective, we have a whole cluster of standards about financial performance of an organization and things that an organization that's accredited must do, whether it's ensuring that there are good and clear policies and procedures for how money is handled, how budgets are established and approved within an organization, how the audits must be performed, et cetera. So I think that directly we have some influence there, but really from an indirect perspective, if an organization becomes accredited, one of the things that we've seen over and over again through CARF is that once an organization has been accredited for a while, things start to change in the organization in terms of consumers report higher levels of satisfaction, outcomes of the people that are being served by that organization continue to improve, and usually organizations win more business as a result, because now suddenly insurance companies are more willing to do business with an accredited organization than an unaccredited organization. States or local authorities usually are starting to push more services to the accredited organizations, and so consequently, there's opportunities for growth and then, more fiscal stability. And that's really, at the end of the day, having an organization that's going to be there and that's going to survive over a number of years is really important to an individual seeking services. You don't want to get services from an organization that might be out of business, next week when you come for an appointment. That's not to say that happens, on a daily basis, but certainly there are organizations that suddenly close their doors simply because they're unable to continue to sustain themselves in what is a very, razor-thin margin kind of industry.
One of the nice things that we've experienced from having our CARF accreditation is WestBridge is a 501c3 and we're an operating foundation. So our whole way of doing business is a little bit different because we have our founders are on our board of directors, which isn't uncommon, I don't think, especially with some of the ARTA programs. But I have to say the surveyors initially they'd ask us questions and we'd say, well, that's not how we do it. This is how we do it. And once they understood the rationale for it, they were okay with it. So I really felt like there was some give and take and there was some flexibility that having been part of the other accreditor for hospitals, I didn't experience that kind of flexibility.
And that's what I think is probably the biggest hallmark, of CARF is that we really don't have a set of prescriptive standards that say that you must do things precisely this way. Our standards are written that we believe that there are certain things that have to be accomplished by an organization, but there may be a variety of different ways that particular standard is being conformed to. And so we don't have full-time surveyors. Our surveyors are people that are peers in the field that work at CARF-accredited organizations, and when they come, their goal is to learn about how your organization functions, applying the standards through the lens that you have applied those standards in the organization, and then hopefully providing some give and take, as you suggest, some consultation about perhaps there might be ways to do this better, or I think a lot of times our surveyors learn from organizations such as yours where there's something that's unique that you do that they take back to their organization, and it's kind of a great thing that that information is being spread all throughout the field through this accreditation process.
So, can you just explain, there are different areas of an organization that become accredited. Could you explain to our listeners what those different areas are you can receive accreditation in?
Well, there in behavioral health, for instance, there are 26 different distinct types of programs that an organization could get accredited in, and those things range from typical programs such as outpatient services or intensive outpatient services or case management, but they could be things that are more unique, such as diversion programs, maybe from criminal justice, the criminal justice system. It could be assertive community treatment, which are very intensive, wraparound service types of programs, or prevention services for programs that are providing care to individuals in schools and settings such as that.
And we'll be right back to talk more with Michael about accreditation after this commercial.
You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
WestBridge Community Services. WestBridge is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the recovery of families and individuals who experience co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. WestBridge provides integrated dual diagnosis treatment for adult men and women using evidence-based practices. Visit our site today at westbridge.org and discover that doing what works in helping individuals and families gain recovery from dual disorders is important to the staff at WestBridge Community Services. WestBridge utilizes current evidence-based practices, consensus practices, and old-fashioned common sense to provide treatment to individuals and families that experience co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. That's westbridge.org, family-centered recovery for co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse disorders.
Why do people behave the way they do? The study of human behavior is one of the most interesting facets of life. Human behavior gets played out in a limitless number of ways. Now, there's a radio program that explains the why and the how of what we do. Human Behavior, What a Trip, is hosted by Dr. Jonathan Brower and will include interesting guests as well as call interaction from people like you. Let's have fun with this together. Listen every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You're listening to 1 Hour at a Time with host Mary Woods. If you have a question for Mary or her guest, call now. The listener lines are open. The toll-free number is 1-866-472-5792. That number again is 1-866-472-5792. Now, let's get back to Mary and 1 Hour at a Time.
Welcome back to 1 Hour at a Time. This is Mary Woods, and today we're talking about achieving quality through CARF-accreditation with our guest, Michael Johnson, who is the Managing Director of Behavioral Health for CARF International. Before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about the different areas where you could become accredited in, and you began to talk about the standards. So what is the process for developing those standards?
Well, we have a very, formal and somewhat, rigid process, as you would imagine, for developing standards within CARF. The first thing that we do is we identify a need, and how we identify that need could be in a variety of different ways, whether it's stakeholders that may say there's a particular area that we think there should be a program for, or we may get input from surveyors, variety of different ways, but then sort of an idea would be born that said, there seems to be an area of evolution in the field that we want to adapt to. So the first thing that we do is we hold what we call an International Standards Advisory Committee meeting, and that's where we bring together experts from around the country or around the world, depending upon the different program area that we're talking about, where that group establishes sort of the basic framework of what those standards are going to be. In fact, our CARF is based in Tucson, and I'm in Washington, D.C. right now because we're getting ready to have a International Standards Advisory Committee meeting over the next couple of days to establish a new program area for peer and family support services. So we'll be working on new standards then. But once that ISAC meets and fleshes out kind of the standards in a new program area, then it is referred to another body that CARF has, and there's about 40 different organizations that are part of what we call our International Advisory Committee. And we would forward to this IAC the standards that are developed in our initial pass. They give their feedback and input, and then after the IAC has their shot, then we go to a field review, and during the field review process, we post those new standards on our website. We also send it out more actively to a number of stakeholders. It could be organizations that are accredited, surveyors, other interested parties, and we solicit input from a whole lot of people, and we read every bit of feedback that we get to make sure that the standards that we ultimately come up with really reflect the desire that the field has. Now, one of the other characteristics that is kind of unique to CARF is that in our policy and in our practice, we have not less than 20% of the people who are represented in these international standards advisory committees that are made up of consumers of services. So people who have lived experience with the types of programs that we're talking about, we really solicit, we bring them into this process to ensure that their voice is ultimately translated into those standards so that so that really we are sticking to our sort of person-centered philosophy, which is really at the core of the CARF standards process.
So can you give us an example of a standard that is currently in that process?
Well, in the really that the peer support programs we're right at the beginning of developing program standards for that. The way that typically what happens is that we publish a standards manual every January. So this would be the time in the spring and into the summer where we would be refining any new standards that would go into the next year's manual. So right now, that's the only thing that we have that's in the pipeline of new programs. The other thing that we're doing is we are taking a look at, and I don't, for lack of getting too technical, one of the areas that we have in our general program standards for behavioral health is in discharge and transition planning, and we think that there's some things that we need to do to kind of tweak those standards to make them a little bit more clear and give organizations better guidance about when and how to do transition planning on individuals, and then sort of clarifying the difference between discharge planning and transition planning. So we're going to be working on that and getting some stakeholder involvement in that process as well.
In this current climate of managed care and managed benefits, transition and discharge planning can be very abrupt.
That's for sure.
It's difficult. It's not like it was before where you knew how long somebody was going to be there and you didn't have to every 3 days still try to qualify for an admission.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why we recognize that those standards need to be adapted a little bit. I think that because the general program standards are one that every organization and every program has to be able to achieve, you're right, depending upon the typical length of service for one program versus another. If you're in a addictions residential program, you may have an expectation that person is going to be there for 14 days, but ultimately may only wind up being there for 5 or 7 days, and depending upon what the payer demands. So we want to make sure that that we're flexible enough with that transition planning to adapt to that particular type of environment, but not letting the organizations that do have folks that are going to be in their programs for a longer length of time from not having to conform, to making sure that that individual is involved in knowing when they're going to be completing this program and what their expectation is for the next service afterwards, if there is going to be another service delivered subsequent to the current program.
This is kind of, I'm going to digress for a minute. What made you get involved with this?
Well, me personally, I worked in CARF-accredited programs since 1990. I had gone through, just as you were describing in your organization, going through the survey process, and was very involved in that in my particular organization that I worked at in Florida at the time. And I sort of had this feeling, well, gee, I'd like to learn more about it, inquired about becoming a surveyor, and was ultimately selected and went through the training. And as you said at the opening, I did that for 16 years. One of the things that is terrific as a surveyor is that you do have an opportunity to get outside of your organization and see how other people do things, and then you're able to learn and bring that information back to your organization. There are countless things that I learned in doing surveying that ultimately I applied in the organization that I worked in. And then because I had worked around CARF for so many years, the person who was the former managing director for behavioral health is somebody who I've known and admired for a great number of years, had worked in that position for a long time, and when it came open, I thought it was something that I would want to do. I wanted to be able to take my expertise and experience and apply that to a larger setting. Often I could be influential in an organization that I worked at a executive level, and sometimes even in state types of activities, but I was hoping to be able to take that expertise onto a larger scale, and CARF certainly affords me that opportunity to do that.
Well, it certainly is a collaborative process, and I think learning is both when you're being surveyed and also while you're preparing for your survey. Because, if I can only say for us, if we didn't have to do this, we would probably let some things go, because you get busy in the moment and you think, oh, well, we'll do that next week. But when you know you're being held to a certain level, you think, oh, we probably should make time to do this week.
No, absolutely. And that's the ultimate discipline. I think that as you become accredited for a number of years, it does become your culture is enveloped with that, and you have a common language, you have common practices and processes that you establish, and you're right. I mean, there are probably 70%, let's say, of the things that are standards in that standards manual are things that you probably would do anyway, because it makes sense if you're going to be in the behavioral health business. But that other 30% is that part where you're kind of striving to do things in a more disciplined way, making sure that you have a thoughtful strategic plan, that you are evaluating your risk management activities, and that you are holding yourself accountable to some set of standards around outcomes, and being able to gather that data and analyze it in a meaningful way to ensure that you're delivering the best possible care to the individuals that you're there to serve.
Very well said. You've said this before.
That's the first time I ever said that.
Yeah. I think that sometimes we think about accreditation, and I think for families, it's just so important that they really look into what it means to be accredited. I don't know whether, are you accrediting sober housing or sober houses?
It can be, yes.
At all? Yeah.
It can be,
but that's still important.
Mm-hmm. But I think most of the time, it's probably the organizations are not applying for accreditation unless they're being mandated to do so by a local authority.
Yeah. Because there's just a lot of people out there with good intentions, but they're really clueless as to what they're doing. And I think that the accreditation process kind of helps people develop the skills they need to be successful, or weeds out the ones that truly are clueless.
Yeah. Well, the thing that you said that really resonated with me was when you said that it's that process of looking at yourself. I mean, I really think my experience working in accredited organizations is that in some ways the survey can be anticlimactic, because you've spent all this time, you work at it, and the surveyors come in and look at it and they go, yeah, great, that you're conforming to the standards, and you're like, no, this is really important. We worked for 6 months on this.
Right.
But that's the real meaning, and that's the important thing is that it forces you to look at yourself and to develop good procedures.
And we'll be right back after this commercial to talk some more with Michael about CARF accreditation.
You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
WestBridge Community Services. WestBridge is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the recovery of families and individuals who experience co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. WestBridge provides integrated dual diagnosis treatment for adult men and women using evidence-based practices. Visit our site today at westbridge.org and discover that doing what works in helping individuals and families gain recovery from dual disorders is important to the staff at WestBridge Community Services. WestBridge utilizes current evidence-based practices, consensus practices, and old-fashioned common sense to provide treatment to individuals and families that experience co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. That's westbridge.org, family-centered recovery for co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse disorders.
Better communication means better relationships in every sense of the word. When you communicate more effectively and interact more effectively, your life is lived more effectively. Tune in to Talk Time with Trish, featuring host Trish Ferrante and co-host Lisa Stewart. Our program is all about the human element. We are all comprised of parts and stuff that we may be aware of, or others may be aware of. When we become aware of what others are aware of, it means more to us. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific on Voice America Health and Wellness.
No matter what our age is, health deserves our utmost attention. But how do you achieve optimal wellness? Tune in to Ask Lorna Live. Your host, Lorna Vanderhaeg, will provide research-backed solutions that will have you feeling fit and fabulous. It all comes down to hormones. We'll show you how it works with mainstream medicine along with nutritional medicine. Listen for Ask Lorna Live every Wednesday at 6 a.m. Pacific Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You're listening to 1 Hour at a Time with host Mary Woods. If you have a question for Mary or her guest, call now. The listener lines are open. The toll-free number is 1-866-472-5792. That number again is 1-866-472-5792. Now, let's get back to Mary and 1 Hour at a Time.
Welcome back to 1 Hour at a Time. This is Mary Woods, and today we're talking about achieving quality through CARF-accreditation, and our guest is Michael Johnson, who is the Managing Director of Behavioral Health for CARF International. I think it's important for everyone to understand that this is an investment that an organization makes. There's a significant cost to applying for CARF accreditation, which is monetary. But then there's also the investment of time to review the standards, to make the changes that you need to make as an organization to adhere to the standards. And over the last couple of years, we've now have one dedicated full-time position who that's basically, he's quality improvement and he monitors our CARF standards to help with our quality improvement. And we recently just did we looked at discharges over the last 6 months to kind of get a sense of, what went well, what are the things that we could have done differently with some of our discharges. And it's a continuously improving system, which I think makes us feel like we're growing, even though it is a significant investment. I believe it's well worth it.
Well, that's what we hope. I mean, I think that in terms of the overall fees, for instance, to CARF, I mean, we keep a check and we are the least expensive accrediting organization for behavioral health. But I think that the commitment that you wind up making internally to your organization for committing those resources, like you say, establishing a full-time position, which is monitoring quality and your conformance to standards, I mean, that winds up being where a lot of that significant investment happens. But hopefully the dividends are paid back sort of greatly, because you know where you stand, like you say, you're looking at your discharges, figuring out, are we doing the right things the right way? And ultimately that's going to translate into better care.
It does. And I think it can be very validating as well. We get surveyed every 3 years, so those interim years, it's kind of nice to know you're still doing, good stuff. Or there's stuff that, maybe we better look at this because, this may have slipped a little bit or the standard has changed. I know from our first survey to our second survey, there were a few standards that had changed. So it's a moving target.
Yeah, they do evolve. I mean, they're, as I was saying earlier, we do publish a manual each year. Sometimes, in some areas, very little or nothing may change, but then in other areas there may be more drastic changes. It really is reacting to what's going on in the field, and I think that really we're all facing with the Affordable Care Act some pretty drastic changes. I mean, I doubt there's any more chaotic time in healthcare generally and in behavioral health specifically than what we're going to be facing as more and more of the tenets of the ACA rollout. And so we at CARF are going to be challenged to continue to ensure that we are maintaining standards that are current and relevant and that meet the needs of the individuals that are being served by the organizations we accredit. Really, in our way of thinking, to CARF, and you'll see this if you look at the standards manual. We view, the moral owners of CARF as being the individuals that are served by the programs that we accredit. And so we're conscientious to ensure that that person served is really at the center of what we do and how we develop standards and adapt those standards over time.
So at what level are standards set at?
That's a good question. We were asked that. I was doing a training a couple of weeks ago, and some people were sort of wringing their hands a little bit about that. It's the standards are set at what would probably be established by the industry as being high quality. It's not really the middle of the road. It's probably a little harder than average, but it's not unachievable. All of the standards are set that demonstrate good practice and that would be achievable by organizations with a minimal amount of sort of resource commitment. And what I mean by that is that we don't have the expectation that an organization that is delivering behavioral health care services should have to spend tremendous amounts of money in order to be able to become accredited. But if they work hard, they study themselves and apply those standards to that organization, they should be able to come up with creative ways to achieve it without taxing them to a point where they feel as though they're going to be unsuccessful at being able to reach that standard.
Well, I think that's really important because if you make it too high, it becomes unrealistic and it deflates the people who are trying to adhere to it. I think there's something very important about knowing you're doing something right and you're doing something well, as opposed to feeling like you're always failing to achieve that standard.
Yeah, no, level. I think that's absolutely right. I think that, and we recognize that this is part of a process. The way that you can conform minimally to a standard, or you can conform, sort of maximally to a standard. If I think over time, as organizations get more and more confident and comfortable with the different areas of quality, they may look back at, prior accreditation survey visits, 3 and 6 years ago and say, gosh, we were sort of in our infancy in figuring out how to do this stuff, but now we're much better. So when the surveyors come, we actually score each of the individual standards that are applied on a scoring system, and it's not necessarily relevant to the outcome in that there aren't individual standards that are going to make an organization be accredited or not, but it's an opportunity to provide some feedback that says that, yes, an organization may be partially conforming to a standard. They're more than halfway there, let's say, in meeting a particular standard in say, strategic planning, but there's still some things missing, and so it allows for that give and take, and to give credit where credit is due, but to say that it's still not quite up to what the standards would demand.
Well, and I think it's important for folks to understand that there's a clinical survey that happens as well as an administrative survey that happens concurrently. So
yeah,
that one person is focusing on clinical practice.
Yeah, no, there's the different program areas that you apply for accreditation in are being looked at equally to the business practices, and so we're going to provide surveyors that have expertise in the different program areas that you would be applying for your accreditation. If it was, outpatient substance abuse treatment, we're going to make sure that our program surveyor has expertise in that, so that not only is he or she able to come in and apply the standards, but as I had said earlier, to be able to provide some sort of consultation to the organization too. And our goal is to add value in the process, in the survey process, more than just the application of the yes and no about standards conformance, but really hopefully being able to share with you insights as to how other organizations perform similarly.
Mark, can you share with us, and maybe this is an unfair question, but what is the standard for making a program co-occurring?
Well, we have there are in the different program areas. So let's say that you apply for accreditation under outpatient and residential treatment. One of the other things that an organization has to define for itself is, does it provide mental health services or addiction services, or what we call integrated mental health and substance abuse services, which is commonly referred to as co-occurring. And what we're looking for there is evidence that the organization provides both mental health and substance abuse services in an integrated manner in that treatment plan, and that staff are able to provide care across that spectrum. Commonly, people with mental health issues abuse substances, and commonly people who abuse substances have mental health issues. And if we treat them as exclusive domains, we have learned over the years that we are far less effective at achieving the types of outcomes where an individual gets into a solid, sound, and long-lasting recovery. And so we want to make sure that that there's not separate teams, and that there's never information shared between the mental health folks and the substance abuse folks in an organization that views itself as an integrated treatment program.
I asked you that because so many of our families come to us, and they've been to places that say they do co-occurring disorders, they treat co-occurring disorders, but they really do sequential treatment. They'll get somebody stable in one area and then refer them to another program for treatment in the other area. And so I think that's a great, if an organization is CARF-accredited, then that has been defined in some way, shape, or form.
Well, you can see, if you look on our website, if you're an individual and you are looking to get treatment for mental health or substance abuse or both, and you go to the CARF website, you can look for CARF-accredited programs in your area. It would say what the program area is, and then you would also be able to know whether it's integrated mental health and substance abuse, or if they define their programs as a mental health program or a substance abuse program.
And what's the website, Mike?
It's www.carf.org.
Easy to remember.
I think so.
And we'll be right back after this commercial.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
WestBridge Community Services. WestBridge is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the recovery of families and individuals who experience co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. WestBridge provides integrated dual diagnosis treatment for adult men and women using evidence-based practices. Visit our site today at westbridge.org and discover that doing what works in helping individuals and families gain recovery from dual disorders is important to the staff at WestBridge Community Services. WestBridge utilizes current evidence-based practices, consensus practices, and old-fashioned common sense to provide treatment to individuals and families that experience co-occurring mental illness and substance use disorders. That's westbridge.org, family-centered recovery for co-occurring mental illness and substance abuse disorders.
9 different energy systems make up the energy body. Energy is all around us and connects us. Energy exerts a major control over our biology and is a big reason why you should be tuning in to Energy Medicine and Optimal Health with your host, Dr. Ann Deatley. We'll explore energy balance techniques, tips, and patterns to keep your flow of energy optimal to maintain maximal health. By adopting these techniques, you will keep your energy body and physical body in harmony. Listen for Energy Medicine and Optimal Health, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time on Voice America Health and Wellness. Step into the doorway to conscious choice, greater health, and well-being. Attain the balance that you've been seeking. Tune in and turn on 1111 Talk Radio. Feed the mind. Embrace positively. Release the tension. Step out of fear. Host Simran Singh will help you broaden your mind and open your heart toward a greater understanding of how to take charge of your life. 1111 Talk Radio is here every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time on 7th Wave Network. 1111 Talk Radio, because shift happens.
Learn more. Live better. Voice America Health and Wellness.
You're listening to 1 Hour at a Time with host Mary Woods. If you have a question for Mary or her guest, call now. The listener lines are open. The toll-free number is 1-866-472-5792. That number again is 1-866-472-5792. Now, let's get back to Mary and 1 Hour at a Time.
Welcome back to 1 Hour at a Time. This is Mary Woods, and I'm your host today, and we're talking with Michael Johnson, who is the Managing Director of Behavioral Health for CARF International, about achieving quality through CARF accreditation. And as we talked earlier, there's the clinical side of quality improvement, and then there's the actual organizational quality improvement. And when we were at break, Michael was talking about a few things that are evolving for CARF, and can you just share with us, briefly what they are?
Sure. We have in the field of mental health and substance abuse, or what we now call behavioral health services, it has been sort of detached in a lot of ways from the primary health system. People have been expected to get their primary care services outside of the system in which they get their mental health services. And over the last probably 5 or 7 years, there's been a great deal of push and emphasis in our industry to try to bring those systems more closely together. And so we have developed standards around health homes, for instance, that's in our current manual, that would allow an organization to become accredited that provides both primary health care services and mental health services in an integrated way, very similarly to what we were talking about in the integration between mental health and substance abuse services, that the individual plan would include treatment that is being monitored around their health status, as well as the goals and objectives for their mental health and or substance abuse service. So an organization could apply for accreditation as a health home, and we would come and look at that in an integrated way. We also have a new program area, or newer, for integrated behavioral health and primary care. So it's less intense than a health home, but also with the expectation that it assesses and treats the mental health and primary care services that an individual needs. And then lastly, this past year we added another program area that's not a program area, it's a special population designation in a residential type of program for eating disorders. So individuals that offer eating disorders programs can be accredited for that in their residential or inpatient treatment milieus.
I think that behavioral health is such a paradox, because for state-funded programs, there are certain rules and regulations you need to maintain in order to be licensed. But there's no mandate in some states to be licensed, and it just seems like it's like the Wild West. There are some states that are highly regulated and really have their act together, and there's other states where, one of the ways they've seen to cut savings was to deregulate. And, I think consumers need to have a voice in this, and they have to really stand up and say, we want good quality care. And I think CARF, at least if they go to the CARF website, they'll begin to see what that should look like.
Yeah, certainly they have that opportunity. We have CARF-accredited programs in behavioral health in every state in the country. So there wouldn't be any place that you would not be able to, maybe at some distance, but there is not a state that wouldn't have at least one CARF-accredited program. I do think that there has always been an expectation of the healthcare system that, people are licensed, that they deliver a high-value service, and you occasionally hear on the news where somebody was, providing unlicensed medical services out of a house or garage, and it came to the attention of the authorities, and they shut them down. But a lot of times in behavioral health, they don't seem to apply a lot of those same standards. Partially, I think that, we still struggle with stigma in this country. We don't necessarily give people with addictions or mental illness the same level of voice, perhaps, in the state houses and at the federal government level that we would expect from everybody else. But, at the end of the day, people who are receiving a behavioral health care service deserve to have that delivered in a high-quality way, and that is most likely going to achieve the type of outcome of, a high degree of recovery for that individual. And so, certainly we support states that have mandates. I think that there are states that say we want to reduce our cost and of licensing programs, and what many of those states have done is turn to the accrediting bodies and said, if we will mandate that you have to be accredited, whether it's us or one of the other accrediting bodies for behavioral health, but at least that ensures a certain level of ongoing quality improvement that oftentimes state regulators are unable to enforce anyway. So I think that folks, if you're seeking an opportunity to advocate for what folks need in behavioral health in this country, it would be that we want to make sure that there's the highest quality possible of services that achieve the best possible outcomes for recovery for the individuals being served. And accreditation is certainly a way to do that.
It certainly is, and at least then you're comparing apples to apples. Across every state, you're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, and there are certainly differences in the way that, licensing rules are applied from state to state, but really we have one standards manual for behavioral health. They should be complementary to any local requirements. If you're meeting our standards, there may be some things that you also have to do for a local authority, but for the most part, I think, we have some recognition in many, many states, actually, that identify that if you are CARF-accredited, then we know that you're meeting our basic requirements. I think, we had talked about during the break that in Florida, as an example, if you are an accredited organization, then you get what's called deemed status for licensure. The state doesn't come in and do a licensure visit for substance abuse programs because they recognize that you already are meeting these higher levels of quality improvement activities.
Is there ever a time when an organization could lose their accreditation? Besides voluntarily giving it up?
It's pretty rare. It could happen if an organization is blatantly no longer continuing to perform, if there are complaints that are being lodged with us, and then we, during the course of investigation, recognize that they are not continuing to use the standards to manage their organization. But for the most part, whether you're in a state that has mandated accreditation or whether you choose to become accredited voluntarily as your organization, Mary, usually there's a commitment, to that continuous quality improvement. And most of the people that work in our field deliver, good services. They want to do the right thing. We just help to provide a framework and hopefully some leadership down the road to helping them to identify what that quality should look like and what form it should take in that organization.
So I guess if you were to sum up the value of CARF for our listeners, what would you say the ultimate value of CARF is?
I think the ultimate value of CARF is that the individual that is seeking services, if they find an accredited organization, they can go into that organization to receive services confidently, knowing that that company or that organization has committed itself to ongoing continuous quality improvement, that it has used these international standards to drive the way it organizes its business, and the individual can rest assured that it's going to be treated with, dignity, respect, and that it is that organization's goal is to have a highly satisfied customer at the end of the day. I think for the organizations, it provides that framework to manage and to know, what to do next. I think I, like you, have been in, positions, leadership positions in organizations, and there's always something to do today. There's always some, crisis du jour. But really, knowing that you can effectively achieve accreditation and quality is great for the organization and the individuals being served.
Thank you so much, Michael, for spending this hour with us. It's been very illuminating for me, and I hope our listeners will take what you said, and when they go out to do their research for treatment, they look at this. So thank you so much, and have a good week, everyone.
We appreciate you joining us today for 1 hour at a time. Successful recovery from a substance abuse